Welcome to Quiet Night Chronicles, where we explore the gentle rhythms of history through the soft lens of time. Tonight, we journey back over 4,000 years to the fertile banks of the Nile River, where ancient Egyptians discovered something extraordinary, hidden within the tall, graceful reeds that swayed in their marshlands. Picture yourself standing beside those ancient waters, watching as skilled craftsmen transformed simple plants into something that would forever change how humanity preserves knowledge and wisdom. The story begins with a plant that grew abundantly in the marshy delta of the Nile River, the sacred cypress papyrus. Imagine these towering reeds, reaching heights of 10 to 15 feet, their feathery tops dancing gently in the warm Egyptian breeze. These weren't ordinary marsh plants to the ancient Egyptians. They were sacred, blessed by the gods themselves, and held deep spiritual significance in their culture. The papyrus plant was so revered that it became the symbol of Lower Egypt, appearing in countless hieroglyphic inscriptions and decorating the columns of their most sacred temples. These remarkable plants thrived in the shallow, nutrient-rich waters where the Nile met the Mediterranean Sea. Picture the peaceful marshlands at dawn, with early morning mist rising from the water's surface as ibis birds stepped carefully through the reeds. The papyrus plants grew in dense clusters, their thick, triangular stems rising straight and tall from underwater root systems that spread like underwater gardens. Each plant was a testament to the life-giving power of the Nile, drawing sustenance from the river's annual floods that deposited rich black silt across the delta. The ancient Egyptians understood that these plants were more than decorative marsh dwellers. Within each green stem lay the potential for something miraculous, the raw material for the world's first true paper. The word papyrus itself comes from the Egyptian phrase papyrah, which means that which belongs to the house of the pharaoh. From this ancient term, our modern word paper was born, connecting us directly to these peaceful craftsmen who worked beside the Nile so many centuries ago. Let us now follow the ancient harvesters as they made their way into the marshlands during the optimal seasons for gathering papyrus. The best time for harvesting was during the dry season, when the plants had reached full maturity and their stems contained the highest concentration of usable pith. Picture these skilled workers moving silently through the shallow waters in simple reed boats, their practiced eyes identifying the finest specimens among the swaying stalks. The harvesting process required both knowledge and reverence. Workers would wade carefully through the marsh, feeling beneath the waterline for the base of each plant. Using sharp bronze or copper knives, they would cut the stems as close to the root as possible, ensuring they captured the full length of usable material. The cutting had to be done cleanly and swiftly. A ragged cut could allow water to seep into the precious pith, potentially ruining the entire stem for paper-making purposes. Each harvested stem was immediately inspected for quality. The harvesters looked for stems that were straight, unblemished, and of uniform thickness. Imagine the quiet concentration of these workers as they sorted through their harvest, setting aside the finest specimens for the most important papyrus sheets, those destined for sacred texts or royal scrolls. The sound of water lapping gently against their boats, mixed with the soft rustle of reeds in the breeze, creating a peaceful symphony that accompanied their ancient craft. After harvesting, the precious stems were carefully bundled and transported to workshops, often located near temples or royal complexes where the finished papyrus would eventually be used. These bundles were kept moist during transport, wrapped in wet cloth to prevent the pith from drying out prematurely. The entire harvesting process was governed by careful timing and seasonal knowledge passed down through generations of craftsmen who understood the subtle rhythms of both the river and the sacred plants that grew within its embrace. Now let us step into one of these ancient workshops where the true transformation began. Picture a quiet courtyard space, perhaps within a temple complex, where skilled artisans prepared to unlock the hidden potential within each papyrus stem. The air would be filled with the green, earthy scent of fresh plant material, and workers would move with the practiced precision that comes from years of perfecting their craft. The first step in preparation involved carefully removing the tough, green outer rind from each papyrus stem. Using sharp bronze knives, workers would make shallow cuts along the length of each stem, then peel away the outer layer in long strips. This process required great care. Too deep a cut would damage the precious white pith inside, while too shallow a cut would leave tough fibers that could ruin the finished paper. Imagine the gentle scraping sound of metal against plant fiber as these ancient craftsmen worked with meditative focus. Once the outer rind was removed, the workers revealed the treasure within, the white, spongy pith that formed the heart of each papyrus stem. This inner core had the consistency of firm cheese, dense enough to be sliced cleanly, but soft enough to release its natural adhesive properties when pressed. The pith was typically 2 to 3 inches in diameter and gleamed white as fresh snow in the workshop's gentle lighting. The revealed pith was immediately placed in containers of fresh water, where it would soak for several days. This soaking process served multiple purposes. It kept the pith moist and workable, began to release the natural plant sugars that would later act as adhesive, and allowed any remaining impurities to dissolve away. Picture these soaking vessels, perhaps large clay pots or stone basins, arranged carefully in the workshop, while the precious pith absorbed the life-giving water that would prepare it for its transformation into writing material. The ancient art of cutting papyrus pith into usable strips was perhaps the most skilled aspect of the entire process. Picture a master craftsman, knife poised over a length of prepared pith, making calculations based on years of experience. The goal was to create strips that were uniform in thickness and width, typically about 1/8 of an inch thick, and varying in width depending on the intended use of the finished papyrus sheet. The cutting process began at one edge of the pith cylinder. Using a knife sharpened to razor keenness, the craftsman would make long, careful cuts from top to bottom, creating strips that ran the entire length of the original stem. Each cut had to be made in one smooth motion to avoid creating ridges or variations in thickness that could weaken the final product. The sound of the knife moving through the soft pith was barely audible, a whisper of metal through plant fiber that spoke of precision and skill. As each strip was cut, it was immediately returned to the soaking water to prevent it from drying out. The craftsman would continue cutting until the entire pith cylinder had been transformed into a neat pile of uniform strips, each one destined to become part of a larger sheet. The wider strips, cut from the center of the pith, where the material was most uniform, were reserved for the finest papyrus sheets. The narrower strips from the edges would be used for everyday writing materials or practice sheets for student scribes. This cutting process required not only technical skill, but also an understanding of how each strip would behave during the later pressing and drying stages. Experienced craftsmen could judge by touch and appearance which strips would bond well together and which might cause problems in the finished sheet. The accumulated wisdom of generations guided every knife stroke in this quiet, methodical process that transformed raw plant material into the components of written communication. Now we come to what might be called the most meditative aspect of papyrus making: the careful arrangement of strips into the crosshatch pattern that would give the finished paper its strength and writing surface. Picture a craftsman seated beside a smooth, flat working surface, perhaps a polished stone table or a piece of perfectly flat wood, with neat piles of prepared papyrus strips soaking in shallow basins nearby. The process began with the creation of the first layer, laid horizontally across the working surface. Each strip was lifted carefully from its soaking water, excess moisture gently squeezed away between the craftsman's fingers. The strips were placed side by side, edges touching but not overlapping, creating a solid horizontal foundation. The craftsman would work from left to right, ensuring that each strip lay perfectly flat and aligned with its neighbors. This required infinite patience and attention to detail. A single misaligned strip could create weaknesses or irregularities in the finished sheet. Once the horizontal layer was complete, the craftsman began laying the vertical layer. The second layer was placed perpendicular to the first, with each vertical strip carefully positioned to create an even crosshatch pattern. The intersection of each horizontal and vertical strip created a small square in the overall weave, and the regularity of these squares would determine the quality of the finished writing surface. Picture the gentle concentration required for this work. The craftsman's eyes moving constantly between the evolving pattern and the remaining strips, calculating spacing and alignment with practiced expertise. The laying process was accompanied by the soft sounds of water dripping from the strips and the gentle placement of fiber against fiber. There was something almost ceremonial about this work, the creation of something that would outlast the craftsman's lifetime, potentially carrying the words of scribes, the wisdom of priests, or the decrees of pharaohs across centuries of time. Each strip was positioned, not just with technical precision, but with the reverence due to materials that would serve the sacred act of preserving human knowledge and communication. With the crosshatch pattern complete, the ancient craftsmen began the crucial pressing phase that would transform their carefully arranged strips into solid sheets of paper. The pressing process was both an art and a science, requiring careful judgment about pressure, timing, and environmental conditions. Picture the workshop as workers prepared their pressing equipment. Heavy stones worn smooth by years of use, wooden boards cut and sanded to perfect flatness, and cloth wrapping to protect the delicate papyrus during the compression process. The arranged strips, still moist from their soaking and laying process, were first covered with a thin cloth or fine linen. This protective covering prevented the papyrus from sticking to the pressing boards while allowing moisture to escape slowly and evenly. The covered arrangement was then placed between flat wooden boards or smooth stone slabs, creating a sandwich with the papyrus formation at its center. Weight was applied gradually, beginning with moderate pressure and increasing over several days. The pressing might start with stones weighing perhaps 50 pounds, then increase to several hundred pounds as the papyrus began to bond and compress. The gradual increase in pressure was crucial. Too much weight too quickly could squeeze out the natural adhesive properties before they had time to bind the strips together. Picture the patient workers checking their presses daily, adjusting weights, and monitoring the progress of the transformation happening within. During this pressing period, something remarkable occurred within the compressed layers. The natural plant sugars and adhesive properties of the papyrus pith began to bond the horizontal and vertical strips together, creating a solid sheet from what had been individual pieces. The crosshatch pattern provided structural strength, while the gradual pressing eliminated air pockets and created an increasingly smooth, uniform surface. This was the moment when strips became papyrus, when plant fiber became writing material through the patient application of pressure and time. After several days under pressure, the papyrus sheets were ready for the next phase of their transformation, drying under the gentle warmth of the Egyptian sun. Picture the craftsmen carefully removing the pressed sheets from their presses, unwrapping them with the anticipation that comes from knowing that success or failure would soon be revealed. A well-pressed sheet would hold together perfectly, with no separation between the horizontal and vertical layers, and a surface that felt smooth and slightly flexible under gentle handling. The drying process took place in carefully chosen locations, areas that received steady sunlight, but were protected from strong winds that might cause uneven drying or warping. The papyrus sheets were laid flat on reed mats or suspended between wooden frames, positioned to receive gradual, even heat from the sun throughout the day. The drying had to be slow and controlled. Rapid drying could cause the sheets to crack or become brittle, while insufficient drying would leave moisture that could later cause mold or deterioration. During the drying days, the sheets were turned regularly to ensure even moisture removal from both sides. Craftsmen would check the papyrus frequently, feeling for areas that might be drying too quickly or too slowly, and making adjustments to the positioning when necessary. The sheets gradually changed color during this process, transforming from the white of fresh pith to the warm, honey-colored tone that we associate with ancient papyrus. This color change signaled the completion of the drying process and indicated that the sheets were ready for their final preparation. The Egyptian sun was the perfect partner in this ancient process, warm and steady, with low humidity that drew moisture from the papyrus gradually and evenly. Picture these drying sheets arranged in peaceful courtyards, slowly transforming under the same sun that warmed the pharaohs and illuminated the great pyramids, becoming part of the eternal cycle of creation that characterized ancient Egyptian craftsmanship. The final stage in creating writing-quality papyrus involved the careful polishing that would transform the dried sheets into smooth surfaces worthy of the finest hieroglyphic inscriptions. Picture a craftsman seated in comfortable shade, a finished but unpolished sheet spread before him, and an array of polishing tools arranged within easy reach. These tools might include pieces of smooth ivory carved from elephant tusks, polished bones from various animals, or stones worn to perfect smoothness by years of use in the papyrus-making process. The polishing began gently, with the craftsmen using broad, sweeping strokes across the surface of the papyrus. The goal was to compress any remaining irregularities in the surface and to create a texture that would accept ink cleanly without spreading or blotting. The polishing tool was held at a shallow angle and moved with consistent pressure across the entire sheet, working systematically from one edge to the other to ensure uniform treatment of the entire surface. This polishing process could take several hours for a single sheet, depending on its intended use. Papyrus destined for royal scrolls or sacred texts received the most intensive polishing, with craftsmen working until the surface achieved an almost silk-like smoothness. Everyday writing materials received less intensive treatment, but still underwent careful polishing to ensure they would serve their users well. The sound of polishing tool against papyrus was soft and rhythmic, a gentle brushing that spoke of patience and dedication to craft. As the polishing progressed, the papyrus surface gradually became smoother and more lustrous. The individual fibers that made up the sheet settled into a unified surface texture, and the natural adhesive properties of the papyrus were further activated by the gentle pressure and friction of the polishing process. When complete, a properly polished papyrus sheet would feel smooth to the touch and would gleam softly in lamplight, ready to receive the ink and reed pens of skilled scribes. Now let us step into the world of the ancient Egyptian scribes, the learned men who transformed blank papyrus sheets into repositories of wisdom, law, literature, and sacred knowledge. These were not merely copyists, but respected members of society who held the keys to literacy in a world where most people could neither read nor write. Picture a scribe's workspace, perhaps a corner of a temple complex or a room within a palace, where carefully prepared papyrus sheets awaited the touch of reed pen and ink. The scribes understood better than anyone the value of the papyrus they worked with. They knew the long process that had transformed marsh reeds into writing material, and they treated each sheet with the reverence it deserved. A single sheet of high-quality papyrus might represent several days of specialized labor. From harvesting through final polishing, scribes were trained not only in the arts of reading and writing, but also in the proper care and handling of their precious writing materials. Before beginning any important work, scribes would inspect their papyrus carefully, checking for any imperfections in the surface that might interfere with clean writing. They would test small areas with their reed pens, ensuring that the ink flowed smoothly without spreading or pooling. This preparation was as much ritual as practicality, a way of honoring the material and preparing mentally for the sacred act of setting words to papyrus. The reverend scribes felt for their craft extended to every aspect of their work environment. Their reed pens were carefully selected and maintained. Their ink was mixed to precise consistency, and their papyrus was stored in protective containers that shielded it from dust, moisture, and insects. Picture these ancient scholars at work, surrounded by the tools of their trade, creating documents that would survive for thousands of years as testimony to both their skill and the remarkable durability of the papyrus they worked on. The influence of Egyptian papyrus making extended far beyond the borders of Egypt itself, creating trade networks and cultural connections that stretched throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Picture merchant ships loading carefully packaged rolls of papyrus alongside other Egyptian treasures, gold, perfumes, and fine linen, preparing for journeys that would carry this revolutionary writing material to distant lands where it would transform local traditions of record-keeping and literature. Papyrus quickly became one of Egypt's most valuable exports, prized by civilizations throughout the ancient world for its superior writing qualities. Unlike clay tablets, which were heavy and fragile, or animal skins, which were expensive and limited in size, papyrus offered a lightweight, durable, and relatively affordable writing surface that could be produced in large quantities. Greek merchants carried papyrus scrolls back to Athens and other city-states, where they became the preferred medium for philosophy, poetry, and government records. The Roman Empire became particularly dependent on Egyptian papyrus, using it for everything from official documents to personal letters. Roman writers praised the smooth writing surface and durability of papyrus, and Roman merchants established permanent trading relationships with Egyptian suppliers. Picture the busy ports of Alexandria, where papyrus was loaded onto ships bound for Rome, carrying with it the knowledge and craftsmanship of Egyptian artisans to every corner of the expanding empire. Even as papyrus spread throughout the ancient world, Egypt maintained its monopoly on production by closely guarding the secrets of papyrus cultivation and processing. The sacred groves where papyrus grew were protected by both law and religious tradition, and the workshops where reeds were transformed into writing material were often associated with temples where access was carefully controlled. This economic strategy ensured that Egypt remained the sole supplier of papyrus for nearly 3,000 years. The controlled production of papyrus was centered around Egypt's great temples and royal workshops, where master craftsmen supervised the entire process, from plant cultivation to finished sheets. These institutions were more than manufacturing centers. They were guardians of ancient knowledge, preserving the techniques and traditions that had been passed down through generations of skilled artisans. Picture the temple workshops at dawn, with craftsmen beginning another day of careful, methodical work that would produce the writing materials used throughout the civilized world. The temples that controlled papyrus production were often the same institutions that maintained Egypt's great libraries and scriptoriums. This arrangement made perfect economic and practical sense. The same priests who needed papyrus for their own record-keeping and religious texts could oversee its production and ensure a steady supply of high-quality writing material. The integration of production and use created a system where quality control was built into every stage of the process. Royal workshops operated under similar principles, but with even stricter quality standards. Papyrus destined for pharaonic use underwent the most rigorous selection and preparation processes, with only the finest sheets making their way to the royal scribes. These workshops also produced the large format papyrus used for official proclamations and monumental inscriptions, requiring specialized techniques for creating sheets of unusual size and exceptional durability. The economic importance of papyrus to ancient Egypt cannot be overstated. It provided employment for thousands of workers, From the harvesters who gathered reeds in the marshlands to the polishers who gave finished sheets their final smooth surface. The papyrus trade generated enormous wealth for Egypt, funding everything from pyramid construction to military expeditions. Picture the economic ecosystem that grew around this simple marsh plant. An entire industry built on the transformation of reeds into the medium that would preserve human knowledge for millennia. The techniques developed by ancient Egyptian papyrus makers were so effective that they remained essentially unchanged for over 3,000 years. Even when parchment and eventually paper made from wood pulp began to compete with papyrus, the fundamental Egyptian methods continued to be used wherever papyrus was produced. The process they perfected, harvesting, preparation, strip cutting, cross-hatching, pressing, drying, and polishing, represented a pinnacle of ancient technology that later innovations built upon rather than replaced. Modern attempts to recreate ancient papyrus using traditional methods have confirmed the sophistication of Egyptian techniques. Contemporary craftsmen who have studied ancient papyrus making report that every step in the traditional process serves a specific purpose, and that shortcuts or modifications generally result in inferior products. The ancient Egyptians had achieved a level of technical mastery that modern science can explain but rarely improve upon. The durability of papyrus, created using traditional Egyptian methods, is evidenced by the thousands of ancient documents that survive today in museums and collections around the world. Some papyrus scrolls are over 4,000 years old, yet remain readable and intact, testimony to both the skill of their makers and the inherent qualities of properly prepared papyrus. Picture archaeologists carefully unrolling an ancient scroll, revealing text that was written when the pyramids were young, preserved on papyrus that still retains its strength and flexibility after millennia. The legacy of Egyptian papyrus making extends far beyond the ancient world. The word paper itself carries the memory of those ancient craftsmen who worked beside the Nile, transforming sacred reeds into humanity's first true writing material. Every time we write on paper, we participate in a tradition that began in the workshops of ancient Egypt, where patient artisans discovered how to capture human thoughts and preserve them for future generations. Reflecting on this remarkable journey from marsh reed to writing material, we can appreciate the ingenuity and patience of those ancient craftsmen who developed techniques so effective that they survived for 3 millennia. The process they created was more than just a manufacturing method. It was a bridge between the natural world and human civilization, transforming the sacred plants of the Nile into the medium that would carry forward the wisdom, stories, and knowledge of countless generations. Picture one final scene: an ancient Egyptian craftsman in the golden light of evening, examining a finished sheet of papyrus with the satisfaction that comes from work well done. In his hands lies a product of weeks of careful labor, from the selection of reeds in the marshland to the final polishing that created a perfect writing surface. This sheet might eventually carry the words of poets, the wisdom of priests, or the laws of pharaohs. It represents the culmination of human ingenuity applied to the gifts of the natural world, creating something that would outlast empires and carry the voices of the ancient world across the centuries to reach us today. The gentle rhythm of ancient papyrus making reminds us that the most enduring innovations often emerge from patient observation of nature, combined with careful craftsmanship. Those Egyptian artisans who first discovered the potential hidden within marsh reeds created more than just a writing material. They opened a pathway for human knowledge to travel through time, preserving the thoughts and wisdom of ages past for our continued learning and wonder. If you found this journey through ancient Egyptian craftsmanship peaceful and enlightening, consider subscribing to Quiet Night Chronicles for more restful explorations of history's gentle innovations. Until next time, may your own creativity flow as smoothly as ink on ancient papyrus, and sleep well.